Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Kane Audio Vlog. It's Friday, time for another Ask Me Anything episode where I look at last week's video, you ask me some questions in the comments and I answer them now. So if you do have any questions from today's videos, leave a comment below and I will answer it next week. However, straight into house admin first, and I just lied because I said I'd answer your questions next week. I probably won't be doing one of these next week, so there'll probably be a week's break, I think. I've mentioned in the past couple of videos that I'm looking at moving house and therefore moving studio as well, and I'm looking at building a new studio in the next property. The move I'm bringing forward, so I'm temporarily going to be in the house while I get the next studio set up. So I think it'll probably be a week or two until I can get into a position and get another AMA video. But hopefully it won't be too long. We'll see. I'll let you know. Yeah, so there we go. Straight into last week's episode and this week's answers, however. Right, Harrison Consoles, thanks for the kind words, Dom. You're welcome. I wasn't expecting Harrison Consoles to reply, so that was about me. Someone asked me what I thought of Harrison Mixbus, and I said that I love it, which I do, especially the 32C, well worth getting. DC Links, hello Dom, are you a member of ASCAP or any other collective rights organisation? Could you give us your 2 cents on getting involved with one of these companies? Yes, I'm with PRS, which is the UK version of ASCAP. ASCAP is the American one. Being with PRS means I'm technically covered for ASCAP stuff as well, because PRS collect on behalf of ASCAP for British members, and I think, I assume it's the other way around for Americans as well. So if you're a member of ASCAP, then anything that happens in Britain gets collected by PRS and then sent to ASCAP accordingly. As for my 2 cents on getting involved, do it. Sign up, even if, so for me, for example, I do quite a bit of music for companies that put the music onto TV. So for example, I'm a writer-composer for Universal, which means I put together music albums, bits and pieces, not necessarily under my own name, in fact very rarely under my own name, purely because I don't want to confuse people if they see there's a new Dom Kane release and it's nothing like what my other releases are like. But then when it goes on to TV, PRS collect the royalties from the license money from said TV network or station. They also do that, well, in Britain they work with PPL, who is another one, and it used to be, I think one specialised in more radio stuff and the other one specialised in TV, if I'm remembering rightly, but they're now kind of one and the same. So as far as I'm aware, and again, by all means check into this, but as far as I'm aware, if you're a member of PRS, you're by default a member of PPL anyway, or at least one has the other covered or something. Worth looking into just in case. But it basically means, you know, if you get support on certainly FM radio in the UK, so let's say BBC Radio 1, for example, you know, their license fee pays for usage of that music. So I know 10 years ago, BBC Radio 1, I assume it hasn't changed much, but it used to be, I think it was £30 a minute, something like that, to have your music played on Radio 1 peak time. Yeah, I think it was about that, something like that. It worked out about £100 every time someone played your track anyway. Yeah, so it's well worth doing because you never know, really. It's free to, I think it's free to sign up. I've been a member for so long, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's free to sign up. If it's not free, it's definitely just a one-off payment, and it's not much. It's just, I think, the administration cost. And then once you're registered, you can register your own tracks and get on the database. And once you're on the database, if your track gets used on, you know, some TV show or whatever, you know, and if you start, so for me, for example, I don't think I ever really made much money from PRS until I started working with companies that specialise in getting your music put onto TV. So, but when that does happen, and if you end up with big companies like Universal, for example, you know, my music's have been in the background on all sorts of programs like Neighbours, Home and Away, Big Brother, Celebrity Big Brother, Embarrassing Bodies, Sky Sports Soccer Saturday or whatever, something like that. Loads of Australian programs, Norwegian, French, German, American, and I think it's pretty much near impossible to keep up with all of that if you were doing it yourself. So that's why you sign up to someone like PRS. Hopefully I haven't waffled too much there, and hopefully I've given enough advice. St. Nicholas, Walls, I'm with you, high five. The DJ, hey, do you mind including an MP3 version of your vlog talk shows for download in the description? I could, or use some sort of MP3 ripper stuff yourself. You've got some sweet tips. I need more high end on a piano in a house style song, but boosting it just doesn't sound right. Neither does parallel processing. Yeah, parallel processing wouldn't increase the highs unless maybe. Yeah, I wouldn't bother for that. I'm going to try wide EQ out some lows and mids and increase the volume if needed. Okay, so yeah, so that was a tip I gave last week on taking away rather than adding to. Piano sound. I guess another thing you want to try maybe is multi-band compression. Get on some of that. That's probably a fairly good way, because if you're doing multi-band compression, then you can tweak the highs a bit more, especially if it's got upwards compression. If you're using Ableton, then the built-in Ableton multi-band, I think it's called multi-band dynamics, with that you can go onto the high end and pull it rightwards, upwards, to boost the upwards compression rather than bring the threshold down. That's definitely worth doing. Other things I would try for piano, do you know what, might not work, but try and add some, if you've got some, say, stabbing chords on piano, add a kick drum to each note, or to each chord I should say. Add a kick drum that has a really sharp high transient, and scoop out all the low end so you're just left with the transient of a kick, and add that to the piano note, and that should make it really stab and cut through, because there's no frequency to the transient necessarily, so that might just cut through everything if that's what you want. Yeah, I'll give that a go. Zombo, is it fun to use an analog synth? Yes, it's fun to use any synth. So when you say analog, I assume you mean hardware, because there's not a huge difference between analog and digital hardware or whatever. So I'm assuming you mean hardware synths. I prefer hardware synths just because you can get your hands on to dials and turn them and play with them, and it's just a bit more fun to play with, really. in terms of quality of sound. I think I've covered that last week, to be honest. Equinofficial, thanks for the AMAs and all the sausages, high five. I'm not 100% on how to phrase this question, so hopefully it makes sense. Okay, here we go. I can see it's long. Something I've noticed since computer music has become trendy is the way people listen to music has become more diversified than ever before. An aspiring producer, of which there are many, will spend a lot of time listening to other electronic producers, and what they pay attention to in songs will be dramatically different than, say, when they were a kid and didn't have a producer's ear. See also the average music listener. This comes with a lot of interesting caveats, and one particular annoyance to me anyway. Take the comment chain of any YouTube upload of any newer Skrillex release. Plenty of comments will say something to the effect of nice sound design, so clean, or maybe some niggle like that sub bass at X minute sounds off. Part of me likes this new awareness and appreciation of the craft, but part of me also thinks there are a lot more listeners these days that are growing, perhaps too analytical to the point that musicality is overlooked. I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, and perhaps how we can encourage producers to share more elaborate or appropriate feedback on music moving forward, or perhaps saying nice sound design, as an all-encompassing as it is good enough. That question was all too long. Sorry for ranting, but it's been on my mind as of late. Cheers and enjoy the weekend. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I guess the listeners are becoming more educated over time because we're mostly producers as well. But also, don't forget that that kind of ties in with the technology growing as well. You know, 30, 40 years ago, people, you know, even engineers weren't really talking about new compression techniques, or certainly not half the amount of sound design we have now. You know, you had a guitar that sounded good or it didn't sound good. It was as simple as that. You had a singer and a drummer and a bassist, and they did their thing, and that was it. So I don't think necessarily, when you look at the bigger picture, that actually maybe, you know, the listeners are only becoming more aware of these things because they're more prevalent in the music itself. So I don't know. This comes with a lot of interesting caveats. So with people commenting nice sound design or so clean, I mean, that's cool. In terms of taking appreciation away from the musicality, I mean, I guess it is. Interestingly, I had a conversation on Facebook with someone. I say conversation, I use the term loosely. A mate of mine commented saying something along the lines of how he'd been having writer's block recently, and he had decided to delve into some sort of music theory something or other, and basically he was saying that he hadn't really, it sounds silly, but he hadn't really considered learning music theory as part of the production process. So I sort of commented saying something silly like, that's like coming to the realization that you're a better bricklayer if you learn how to lay bricks. Because to me, music theory, the basics of music theory, and I'm not talking about learning orchestral orchestration or anything like that. I'm talking about learning a few basic scales. What's in key, what's not in key. A couple of, you know, what's the difference between a major third and a perfect fifth, or, you know, just a few intervals and things like that. Just some basic differences. To me, I think they're essential for a producer to learn, and I think that ties in with what you're saying, where people sometimes focus a bit too much on maybe compressors and reverb and the sound design. Is it an FM based sound or is it subtractive or whatever? And they're kind of forgetting that, is it a good bass line? Is it a good track? You know, so sometimes you kind of have to zoom out a bit. And interestingly, someone commented on that feed saying something along the lines of, oh yeah, but there are loads of great producers who didn't know music theory. And I sort of went, well, yeah, sure, but I'm sure there are loads of marathon runners that didn't like PE, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do these things. And this person kept going on and basically trying to say you shouldn't learn. And in fact, he was going as far as saying learning music theory was a hindrance to production. And then he happened to mention that he was a music production lecturer for a very big global college, which then angered me, because then I thought, well, hang on, aren't you supposed to be an educator? And why are you saying that you shouldn't be educated in education? That's just fucking idiotic. But I guess that's how people see things. You know, he was trying to say, some of his students say, ask him, is this in key? And his response is, it doesn't matter, does it sound good? Well, I mean, that's just a bit retarded, I think, because if the students had learnt just basic music theory, then they'd know if it was in key and they wouldn't have to ask that question, and they'd have a much swifter workflow and they'd be able to just get the job done without stopping to ask those questions. So I think we're in a transition period at the moment where, because like I was saying about the growing technology, I think people's views are changing on what is music, and they're maybe looking at the technical aspects of it rather than the creative aspects, because that's perhaps something you can analyze. You know, if the bass is distorted, that's a fact. If the kick drum is out of time, that's a fact. It's not usually a creative choice. Most people wouldn't choose to have their kick drum out of time. So I think people on YouTube especially are probably maybe trying to come across as a bit clever. So there's, look, I mean, we could go on forever on this. There's a whole multitude of factors in there. However, looking at the last part of your question on how we can encourage producers to share more elaborate or appropriate feedback on music moving forward, do we need to? I'm not convinced. I think, you know, if people spot something that's wrong, that's up to them. Leave them to it. I think it's more a case of we as producers need to stop maybe stop listening to other people's opinions so much, or not stop listening, stop valuing other people's opinions. Just because you have an opinion, it doesn't mean you're right. You know, everything I've just said in the last 18 minutes doesn't make me right. These are my opinions. So if someone says, hey, this is clean, great. Or if someone says, this sounds muddy, fine. It doesn't mean that they're right. So I don't think it really matters, and I don't think as music producers we shouldn't really be valuing other people's opinions too much. Clearly take it on board, but it's not the be all and end all of anything. So hopefully that kind of answers your question as best as I can. Oh, you put another one here. Another question, if I may, this time related to Bitwig. I was delighted to see a stock Bitwig synth used in your Structures remake project. Have you fiddled around with the new-ish voice stacking feature? I feel like I'm just skimming the surface when it's in my patches. I'll be honest, I haven't even looked at it, so maybe I should, and maybe I'll do that as a video when I can. Yeah, that would be cool. Deadly Custard, hey Dom, do you think you'll do a video showing us around Anna 2 a bit? I think you said you're involved in its creation. Sounds like a nice bit of kit. Yes, on both parts. So I did a lot of the factory presets you get when you buy the synth. I was involved in the alpha testing and beta testing and whatnot from very early stages, and it's a wicked synth. So I don't, well, I was going to say yes, I'll do a video on it, but if I'm honest, I would imagine other people have probably done better videos. In fact, because it's owned by Sonic Academy, I would suggest heading to the Sonic Academy site. I can't imagine that they haven't done a great video on the ins and outs of it, if I'm honest. So I probably won't do a video because it would probably not be as good as theirs, assuming they've done one. They'd be idiots if they haven't, so have a look for that. Casey Music, hey Dom, thank you very much for answering all the questions, not videos. Oh yeah, I have another 2 for you. First, what do you think about automatic equalizers like the track assistance of Isotope or the Smart EQ by Sonible? Do you use anything of that kind to get help for detecting disturbing frequencies? I don't use them. I have never used them. I don't know if they're any good. I have one built into the there's a Samsung D1500 EQ that has, and I have room microphones for testing frequencies and stuff, but I've never used them and I don't want to. I mean, from my perspective, if you're having to correct for something, much like when it comes to production, if you're having to compensate or correct for something in the mixdown, you need to stop, go back to your production and correct it there. Or if it's in the sound design, go back a level and correct it there. So the same goes with EQs and corrective EQs and automatic EQs. If you're having to EQ your output through the monitors because there's some resonance bass in your room, you need to fix your room, not your EQ. So I think those things are only if it's absolute last resort. For example, let's say you're in a tiny room and there's a certain frequency and it doesn't matter where you put your speakers in the room because it's a perfect cube 2 by 2 by 2 meter room, and it doesn't matter where you put your speakers positioned and whatever, at one frequency it just has that resonant standing wave. I guess you could maybe EQ out for that, but even then I wouldn't do it automatically. I'd probably do it by ear, or at least by analysis that I can see using something like Room EQ Wizard, something like that, and look at the waterfall graphs and then correct for that. I don't know why, I just don't trust robots enough. The second one is kind of tricky. What do you think about Sausage Fattener? Okay, I'll go kill myself. No, that's not tricky at all. I love Sausage Fattener. I think some people get carried away with it, but I think with these sorts of effects, you know, for me, Sausage Fattener works great in a certain environment. If I want to make a track where I want the bass and kicks and they're already nicely gelled together and I just want that extra bit of sizzle, then, you know, setting something like Sausage Fattener at maybe 5, maybe even 10% would just add a little bit more punch to it, because in the chain I can hear there's some sort of limiter, there is clearly saturation, I think there's some sort of multi-band dynamics going on, and there's another dial, isn't there, that changes the high end, if I remember rightly. I've not used it for years, but there's a lot going on in there, and I think if you were to stick it on your master channel and just max it out, then everything would sound shit. But if you're clever about it and you use it subtly in the background of things, then it can be a really good tool just to sort of bring a bit more sizzle into something. You know, for example, if you're doing, say you're making a techno track and you're using mostly sort of 909 big heavy kicks and claps and hats and everything's just grimy and crunchy anyway, then and you just want that sort of take it to the next level, then something like Sausage Fattener is ideal for that. So yeah, there's a time and a place for everything. Juan Carlos Ivanchevich, sausages, high five. Cav OK. Hi Dom, really enjoying the AMA series, keep them coming, cheers. Regarding the house move and idea to site your studio in the new back garden, read more. Have you watched any of Christian Henson's media composer and Spitfire Audio founder vlog series? If not, might be interesting parts as he has a similar setup. I haven't, but now you've said it, I will. Cheers. Yeah, I sort of... So the long story short is I'm in an industrial estate here at the moment where I'm moving to. There are a couple of industrial estates, but I can't find any units available there. I've been waiting for pretty much a year trying to find a unit to come up. The ones that have come up have not been suitable. So I've kind of decided, right, well, I'll make the move, and rather than rent an industrial unit, which is expensive, and okay, it's not a waste of money, but it's disposed money. So I figured, well, for the price of rent, I could potentially build my own garden office studio, whatever you want to call it. The garden in the house I'm moving to is only small, but I reckon you could just about fit one in there. So going back to house admin at the beginning of this video, I was gonna get the place and build the garden studio first while I then move straight from here to there, because that would have been lovely. However, when I do the maths, it works out that's an expensive way of doing it. As lovely as it would be, I don't earn mega bucks. I'm clearly not rich, so to save money, I'm going to move into the house first, stay there probably 6 months while I get the studio built, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, so I'll look into Christian Henson's videos, because that could be handy. I have watched a couple, it might even be him, I don't know, but I have watched one or two videos of other people making their studio. However, the ones I've seen, they've needed things like a live drum room, which I built into this place. There's a room behind you, which was going to be a drum room slash vocal booth, but I haven't used it once. So I've kind of learned a few lessons, and I spent ages building that wall that's 2 foot deep and heavily insulated. I've got 4 glass windows staggered with alternating widths. I spent so much time and energy planning and building and creating that window that I don't use, and I don't use the drum room, and I've been here for years, and that room ended up just being a bit of storage. So I've kind of learnt my lesson that actually I don't need all of that. Also, I've been looking through the services pages on Kane Audio's site. On the game audio page, you mention adaptive music, and on vlog 022, how long have you been producing game audio? What does the process involve? Any more VR games in the pipeline? I've not been doing it long. I've been, well, so I got my that shadow core job that I had, which I'm no longer doing, but I've done all my part. It's now up to other people to do theirs. When did I start that? Probably 18 months ago, and I'd been dabbling with it probably a year before that. I've not got anything else in the pipeline. It's something I really enjoyed. It's something that I don't consider as my strength or anything like that, but it is something I'm definitely willing to do again. It all depends on various things, like whether they're using WYs or Fmod or whatever, and again whether they're using Unreal Engine or Unity, because I have experience of Fmod and Unreal Engine but not Unity and WYs, so it means I'd have to relearn. Even though I know the process, the workflow would have to change. So yeah, it's not something I'm actively seeking. Okay, that was the camera automatically stopping the recording at 30 minutes, so it means we're at the 30-minute mark. I was talking about the adaptive music, game audio stuff. What's the process involve? It involves, so for the one I did, I had to do a lot of the initial sound design, but for the music, it involves, well, the way I did it was I essentially wrote a main score. I then wrote various melodies and drum patterns that would, so you could develop one piece of music into, say, 5, 6, 7 different tracks that each has a slightly different mood or intensity or whatever, and then it's a case of rendering those out kind of like stems, but more like in between loops and stems, I suppose, and then loading it into something like Fmod and assigning different dials. So in the video, for example, I think I did life, where you start with, say, 100% life and then you go down to 0, and as the dial comes down it changes the mix levels of various loops or patterns or whatever, and then at certain numbers you can get it to trigger a new drum loop. Or so with Fmod, it's much like Bitwig arrangement screen, any sort of audio workstation arrangement screen, but you can set parameters to a dial, so whatever you want that to be, but let's use the health level, for example. So it starts at 0 and finishes at 100%, and at 100% you can be looping this part of the track, and then as the health drops you can set it so the mixer levels of different instruments start coming in, so it starts to sound more intense, and then you can hit a trigger point where, say, if the player moves to a new room and in this room it's really dark, then you can make that trigger at the moment the player drops through. You could trigger, say, a reverb on the drums, and then the drums disappear, and so you could trigger all different actions basically, so it just keeps changing the music, and then vice versa, when the player comes back out of that room it brings the drums back in or whatever. So yes, it's quite a long-winded process. It's a really enjoyable process because you have to think outside the box, and you have to think backwards compared to writing a normal track, because when you're writing a normal track you've got sort of a beginning, middle and end to a story, I suppose, a narrative, whereas with adaptive music it's adapting to the narrative because the narrative isn't set in stone. So it can be pretty good fun. Any more VR games in the pipeline? No, but I would love to get involved with some more, but like I say, I'm not actively seeking it. Good to see Harrison Mixbus 32C getting more love. So glad I bought it. I love how it sounds too. Cool. Cheers and sausages. High five. Sunset86. Hey Dom, thanks a lot for answering my question in the last video. If I may, I'd like to ask a couple more. Would you agree that finding the right sound in the first place will help a mixdown better, as opposed to having to resort to using too much EQ, compression, etc.? Yes, 100% yes. There are so many people who think, oh, but this, you know, don't worry about that noise, I'll fix that in the mix, I'll just clean that up later or whatever. You know, people expect mix engineers and mastering engineers to be magicians, and that's not the case. If you send them a shit track, they'll give you a shit track that sounds a bit better. If you send them a great sounding track, they'll send you an even better sounding version. And you need to remember that any mix engineer or mastering engineer can only slightly improve what you've already done. Then they don't work magic. You know, it's about finding, you know, a good mix engineer shouldn't have to be worried about huge mistakes or things that sound completely wrong, you know. Those things kind of should have already been done in the production process. Question 2. I've been buying a lot of old vintage digital rack modules like the Proteus 2000, Korg Wavestation and the TX81Z because I like old sounds. However, I'm struggling to program them, so mainly used some presets. I'd like to get an analog synth ASAP, as they do look a lot easier to program. What would you say is the best starter analog synth in a reasonable price range? Thanks again, Dom. Please keep the videos coming. Yeah, so things like the Proteus, you can't really do much on those. You know, the JP1080 is the same, or the JV1080, sorry. Korg Wave Station. Yeah, I get what you're saying. You want to be able to manipulate them more. That's because things like the JV1080, the Proteus, they're all what you call Rompler based. So it's, rather than being a subtractive synth, additive synth, wavetable, whatever, it uses samples of other sounds basically held in the ROM of the circuit board. So they're going to be fairly difficult to manipulate properly from any kind of deeper level. As for analog, again, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, are we talking analog or are we talking hardware? But as you said, analog, I'll go with analog, as they look easy to program. I mean, I suppose, yeah, okay, I'll agree, because I think I know what you're saying. I'm not convinced they're easier necessarily. What would you say is the best starter analog synth in a reasonable price range? I don't know what reasonable is. Are we talking £300, £1,000? Because synths obviously range from £100 to 100,000. I mean, for me, I'm always going to say the Moog Sub 37 is the best bang for buck. Having said that, I've heard good things about the Arturia Micro Brute. I've also heard good things about the Minilog, but I haven't tried that yet. A mate of mine bought one like a year ago, and I haven't got round there to try it out yet. So yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea where to start. Mark, well, hello there. Hi again, Dom. For making some dark, moody underground techno, as well as all your stock workstation plugins, what would your choice be for? 2 third-party plugins. Right, so on top of the stock, let's say Bitwig plugins, what would I choose? So 2 third-party plugins. Are we talking effects or synths? If it's synths, I would go with either Ana 2 or Xfer Serum, or Native Instruments Reactor. If it's effects, Native Instruments have done some good choral, flare, and something else. There were 3 little plugins that I got sent. They were really cool. Kilohertz Snap Heap, that would be in there, which is like go to the Kilohertz website and check it out. But Snap Heap is like a multi plugin, so you can have distortion, reverb, flanger, EQ, loads of different plugins, and you drag and drop and build your own chain inside one VST. And yeah, there's some really good effects in there, so I definitely have that. 1 hardware synth, Moog Sub 37. 1 sample pack, more for drum hits and synth-based presets to work off than loops. Ooh. There are 2 sample packs that I would definitely recommend. One is called Drum Tools. I forget who did that one. It's on Loopmasters website though. And the other one is called Drum Construction, which is no longer on the Loopmasters website, and I know because that was my pack. And we took it off a couple of years ago for a long unexplained reason that I won't go into right now. but it may come back. Otherwise, sample packs, Sonny Wharton did a good one. I've used quite a lot of his drum loops actually in some of my tracks. Again, all through Loopmasters, because they're basically the only sample packs and loops pack providers that I use, if I'm totally honest. Apologies if you've been asked this similar questions in the past. Probably have, but I've just answered them anyway. And that, my friends, is the end of this video. As usual, thanks again for listening. Even more thanks if you've made it this far into the video, because I reckon we must be at about 40 minutes now. So to recap, if you've got any questions, please do get involved. The more you like, comment, share, subscribe, whatever, the better the YouTube stats come in, which apparently is of value. So if you want to ask me a question, comment below this video and I'll get to it. To recap, not next week, or unlikely next week, but hopefully the week after that. So if I don't see you before then, have a good weekend and have potentially a great week next week as well. Thanks for listening. Cheers.